They left before sunrise, when the world still felt unfinished. The minivan was packed with the careful clutter of a family trying to be efficient. Duffel bags wedged together like puzzle pieces, a cooler humming quietly between the seats, a shoebox of snacks balanced on top. Claire's coffee was too strong. Mark had forgotten his sunglasses. Evan and Lily argued over the window seat until Evan surrendered and put on a playlist. It was supposed to be a simple drive. Nebraska to Arizona. 2 days if they pushed it, 3 if they didn't. They merged onto the highway as the sky lightened from charcoal to gray. At first everything felt ordinary. The land flattened into quiet fields. Grain silos rose like sentinels. Billboards promised fireworks, antique malls, and injury lawyers. Claire watched the horizon roll toward them while Lily curled around her stuffed rabbit and Evan tapped along to the music. By late morning the traffic had thinned to almost nothing. Cell service faded to 1 bar, then disappeared. The radio drifted between stations, static swelling and receding like breath. Claire told herself the unease was just fatigue. It started with the deer. They stood along the shoulder in a perfect line. 5 of them, fur patchy, ribs faint beneath their skin. None of them flinched as the van approached. None of them blinked. Their eyes reflected the sun with a dull, glassy sheen. They didn't run, Lily said, twisting in her seat. Probably sick, Mark replied. But his hands stayed tight on the wheel long after they'd passed. An hour later they pulled into a lonely rest stop. 2 picnic tables, a peeling bathroom building, heat shimmering off the asphalt. Evan wandered near the edge of the lot, kicking stones. "Mom," he called. Far out in the fields near a line of fence posts, someone stood. The figure was too distant to make out, just a vertical smudge against pale grass. Claire raised a hand, unsure why. After a brief delay, the figure raised its hand too. The movement wasn't mirrored. It lagged, like an echo. Claire felt a prickle crawl up her arms. "Let's go," she said. They left without using the picnic tables. Back on the highway, Mark tried to joke about ghost towns and alien sightings. Evan forced a laugh. Lily stared out the window. Then the radio crackled. "Can you hear me?" Mark reached for the dial. The voice continued. Mark. It was his voice. Not perfect, there was a hollow quality, like sound traveling through a long tunnel but unmistakably his. Mark shut the radio off. The silence afterward felt heavy, compressed. They put on an audiobook and tried to let the miles blur together. The animals grew stranger as the day wore on. A coyote paced them for nearly a mile, head cocked as if listening. A flock of birds wheeled overhead in a tight spiral, then dropped into the brush all at once. A lone cow stood in a field with its neck bent at an impossible angle, chewing slowly on nothing. At a gas station with 1 pump and a hand-painted ice sign, a tall, thin man approached while Mark refueled. "You're not from around here," he said, smiling too wide. "No," Claire replied, stepping closer to Mark. The man nodded, as if confirming something. His eyes lingered on the kids in the back seat. "Road's quiet today." He walked behind the building and didn't come back. When Mark went to look, there was no sign of him. No footprints in the dust. By evening the sky had turned bruised peach and violet. That was when Lily started whispering to herself. "I'm talking to the radio," she said. "There's nothing on," Evan told her. Lily frowned. "Yes, there is. It sounds like Mommy." Claire felt her stomach drop. "What is it saying?" Mark asked carefully. Lily hesitated. "It says I should open the door when we stop. It says it knows where Bunny is." Claire reached back and squeezed Lily's hand. "It's just your imagination." But Lily pulled away. "No, it isn't. It sounds just like you." After that, they began seeing figures more often, on ridgelines walking parallel to the road, crouched low in ditches. Sometimes there were 2, sometimes 3. Every time Claire tried to focus on them, they dissolved back into the landscape. The radio turned itself on. This time it played fragments. Evan laughing, Mark clearing his throat, Claire calling Lily's name. The sounds overlapped and warped, layered like a damaged recording. Mark unplugged it. The whispers continued anyway, faintly from the speakers. That was when Claire understood. Whatever was out there wasn't chasing them. It was studying them, learning their voices, their habits, the way Evan leaned when he laughed, the way Mark drummed his fingers on the wheel, the way Lily sucked her thumb when she was tired. It was practicing. They drove through the night. Mark refused to stop, even as the gas gauge dipped lower than Claire liked. No one suggested bathroom breaks. No one complained. Then Evan pointed out the window. There, on the shoulder. Another van sat there, same color, same roof rack. Inside were 4 silhouettes arranged exactly like them. Lily started crying. Later, in a stretch of jagged rock and badlands, something ran alongside the vehicle just beyond the headlights. The shadow kept pace, broken across the stones. Then Mark heard his own voice, close behind his ear. "Pull over." His foot twitched on the brake. Claire grabbed his arm. "Don't." They don't remember exactly when the landscape changed. Only that suddenly the road flattened, the pressure eased, and the radio went quiet. They drove until they found lights. A real town, a diner, other cars in a parking lot. Under fluorescent bulbs and the comforting clatter of plates, they told themselves it had been exhaustion, stress, too many miles. Lily fed syrup to her stuffed rabbit. Evan watched videos on his phone like nothing had happened. They finished their trip the next day without incident. They don't talk about that stretch of highway, but sometimes Claire wakes up convinced she hears Mark in the hallway, softly practicing her voice. And once, scrolling through old photos, Evan found an image he doesn't remember taking. Their van from far away, framed by empty land, with 4 figures standing in front. All of them facing the camera. All of them smiling. And none of them quite right. They reached the mountains in late afternoon, when the shadows were already stretching long across the switchbacks. The drive had been smooth until then. Claire had dozed in the passenger seat. Mark followed the GPS with quiet focus. Their kids, Jonah and May, passed snacks back and forth and argued gently over music. The cabin was supposed to be another 2 hours away, tucked beside a lake Mark remembered from childhood. The road narrowed as they climbed. Pines crowded closer. The air changed, growing cooler and thinner. Cell service vanished somewhere between one curve and the next. "That's fine," Mark said. "We're almost there." The GPS froze, then recalculated. 5 minutes later, they rolled into a town none of them remembered seeing on the map. It appeared suddenly after a bend in the road. A small cluster of buildings pressed into a shallow valley. A gas station, a diner, a post office with faded lettering. Everything looked old but carefully maintained, as if someone had been preserving it out of habit rather than need. Claire leaned forward. "Did you see this on the route?" Mark shook his head. "No." The kids stared out the windows. They decided to stop for gas. The station was quiet. No cars. No radio playing. The attendant emerged from inside slowly, as if he'd been waiting for them. "You're heading up the pass," he said, not quite looking at Mark. "Yes," Mark replied, "to a cabin near Elkwater Lake." The attendant's eyes flicked to Claire, then to the kids in the back seat. "You won't make it before dark." "We're not far," Mark said. The man hesitated. "You should turn around." Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Why?" The attendant didn't answer. He finished pumping the gas and stepped back. Inside the diner, a handful of locals sat at separate tables, nursing coffee. Every conversation died when the family entered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Someone slowly lowered a newspaper. Claire became acutely aware of how loud their footsteps sounded. A woman behind the counter poured them coffee without being asked. Her hands trembled. "You folks passing through?" she said. "Yes," Claire replied. "Is there something wrong with the road?" The woman opened her mouth, closed it, then glanced toward the windows. "They don't like it when you stop," she said quietly. "Who?" But the woman had already turned away. As they left, Claire noticed something unsettling. The people in the diner weren't watching them with suspicion or hostility. They were watching with pity. Back on the road, the forest thickened. The trees leaned inward, branches knitting overhead in places. Fog gathered in the low spots, pale and sluggish. They drove for nearly 20 minutes before May spoke. "Dad." "Yes, sweetheart. I just saw us." Silence filled the car. "What do you mean?" Claire asked. May pointed back the way they'd come. "There was another car, just like ours, and you were driving it." Mark checked the mirrors. The road behind them was empty. "It was probably just someone with the same model," he said. May shook her head. "No, it was us." They laughed it off, but uneasily. The first copy appeared at a turnout. A family stood beside the guardrail, waving. Mark slowed instinctively. Claire grabbed his arm. "Don't." They looked exactly like them at a distance. Same jackets, same height, same arrangement, father, mother, 2 kids. But as they drew closer, the details went wrong. The other Mark's smile was too wide. The other Claire's head tilted at an awkward angle. Jonah's double stood with his shoulders hunched, arms hanging too long. May's copy waved with a stiff, mechanical motion. Their eyes didn't quite track the car. Mark accelerated. They didn't follow. For a while, nothing happened. Then Jonah swore softly. Up ahead, another turnout. Another family. Closer this time. The copies were better. Proportions improved. Movements smoother. But their faces still lagged behind their expressions, like masks being worn by something unfamiliar with skin. They began to appear more frequently after that, on ridges between trees standing just off the shoulder. Sometimes only 1 or 2, sometimes all 4. Each version was more accurate than the last. The GPS began giving contradictory directions, telling Mark to turn down roads that didn't exist. The radio picked up fragments of voices that sounded almost like theirs, distorted by static. At one point, Claire thought she saw herself walking through the trees, practicing her own smile. "They're learning," she whispered. Mark didn't ask who. Night fell quickly in the mountains. Fog thickened, swallowing the headlights. The road twisted sharply, climbing higher, then dipping into narrow valleys where sound seemed to die. Then May pointed ahead. Someone stood in the road. Mark slammed the brakes. It was May, or something very close to her. The child in front of the car stared up at them with May's face, May's hair, May's favorite jacket. But her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, reflecting nothing. Behind her, shapes moved in the trees. Mark swerved around her and kept driving. In the rearview mirror, the copy watched them go, head slowly turning, studying. They began seeing their own car ahead of them now, just around curves, just beyond reach. Sometimes it was stopped with its doors open. Sometimes it drove at their exact speed. Once, Claire was certain she saw herself in the driver's seat, glancing back over her shoulder. The road grew rougher. The trees thinned. The GPS went black. They rounded a bend and found the cabin. It sat exactly where it should have been, lights glowing warmly in the windows. Relief hit Claire so hard she nearly cried. Mark pulled into the gravel drive. As they stepped out, the forest went quiet. Too quiet. Jonah froze. "Mom!" Claire followed his gaze. Down the road, between the trees, 4 figures stood together. Perfect this time. No wrong angles. No delayed movements. Their copies met their eyes and smiled with their faces, not against them. Mark ushered everyone inside and locked the door. They didn't sleep. In the early morning, Claire woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. She lay perfectly still, listening. Outside, someone cleared their throat. It sounded exactly like Mark. She turned slowly toward him. He was beside her in bed, breathing softly. The knocking started then, gentle and patient. "Claire!" Mark's voice called from outside. "Open the door." From the darkness of the hallway, May's voice joined in. "Mommy, we're cold." Jonah's followed. "Let us in." Claire closed her eyes. When the sun finally rose, the forest was empty. No footprints. No sign of anyone. They left without packing. Weeks later, sorting through photos from the trip, Jonah found one he couldn't remember taking. It showed the cabin from the road. In the foreground stood their family, waving. Behind them, through the front window, another family watched from inside. Every face was identical, except one. One of the Claires wasn't smiling.